I went to pick up my 7-year-old grandson from school and found him crying behind the gym. When I asked what happened, he whispered, shaking, "Daddy said if I tell you what he does to Mommy, he'll..." He couldn't finish the sentence. I took my grandson straight to my house. At 9 p.m., my son-in-law knocked on my door, punching and screaming. I opened the door, stepped outside, and said just one sentence. "Please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what city you're watching from." The words hung in the air between us like a blade. Aiden's face went white, then red, then that dangerous shade of purple I'd seen before in men who'd lost control of situations they thought they owned. His fist was still raised from pounding on my door, but something in my voice, something in the way I stood there, made him lower it slowly. "Where is he?" Aiden's voice came out strangled, like he was fighting to keep it level. "Where's my son?" "He's safe." I kept my voice steady, the same tone I'd used 30 years ago when dealing with difficult situations. "That's all you need to know right now." The tremor in Noah's voice earlier had cut through me like nothing had in years. The way he'd looked around before whispering, checking to make sure no one could hear him. The way his small body had shaken when he tried to tell me what his father had threatened. 7 years old and already learning to live in fear. I'd failed him. For months, maybe longer, I'd been the polite, respectful father-in-law. The kind who didn't ask too many questions when visits got cancelled at the last minute. The kind who accepted "Sarah's not feeling well" as an explanation when my daughter missed family dinners. The kind who believed that modern families needed space, that boundaries were healthy, that my generation needed to step back and let the younger folks figure things out. Standing there looking at Aiden's rage-twisted face, I realized how catastrophically wrong I'd been. "You can't keep him from me," Aiden said, his voice dropping to that low register that probably worked on my daughter. "I'm his father. I have rights." "Rights." I let the word settle between us. "Let's talk about rights, Aiden. You have the right to be a father. Noah has the right to feel safe. Sarah has the right to live without fear. Seems like your rights and their rights aren't compatible anymore." Something shifted in his expression. The calculated anger gave way to something more genuine, more dangerous. This was the Aiden my grandson was afraid of. This was the man who'd been terrorizing my family, while I played the respectful grandfather who didn't interfere. "You don't know what you're talking about, old man." The mask was slipping now. "You don't know anything about my family, about what goes on in my house." "I know enough." The lie came easily. I knew almost nothing, and that ignorance felt like acid in my stomach. "I know my grandson is afraid of you. I know my daughter makes excuses for bruises. I know you've been keeping them away from me. Sarah keeps herself away from you. She's finally learned that you're a bitter old man who can't accept that she has a new family now." The words hit their target. 3 years since Martha died. 3 years of watching my family slip away piece by piece. First the missed calls, then the cancelled visits, then the stilted conversations when I did see them. I told myself it was natural. Sarah was busy with her marriage, her child, her new life. I was the widowed father who needed to learn not to be needy. But looking at Aiden now, seeing the cruel satisfaction in his eyes when he mentioned Martha, I understood what had really happened. He'd used my grief against me, used my respect for their marriage as a weapon, used my love for my daughter to isolate her from everyone who might have seen what he was doing. "Go home, Aiden." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "We'll talk when you're ready to be civil." "Civil?" He laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "You want civil? Give me my son and I'll show you civil. Keep him from me and you'll find out just how uncivil I can be." The threat hung in the air between us. 30 years ago, when Martha was alive and Sarah was small, I would have stepped forward. I would have made it clear that threatening my family was a line you didn't cross. But 30 years of comfortable suburban life had made me soft. 30 years of believing that reasonable people could work things out reasonably had made me forget that some people only understood force. Noah stays here tonight. I was improvising now. No plan beyond keeping that frightened little boy safe. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. Tomorrow you'll give him back or I'll call the police, report you for kidnapping." Call them. The words surprised me as much as they surprised him. "Tell them you want to file a report about the grandfather who picked up his grandson from school. Tell them about the 7-year-old boy who was crying and afraid. Tell them about the father who threatens consequences when children try to tell the truth." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Aiden's face. He was used to controlling narratives, to being the reasonable one while others appeared unstable, but involving police meant questions he might not want to answer. "This isn't over," he said finally. "No," I agreed. "It's not." I watched him walk back to his car, noting how he slammed the door, how he gunned the engine leaving my driveway. The neighbors would have heard the shouting. They'd seen the confrontation. Good. Let them see what kind of man my daughter had married. Inside, Noah was sitting at my kitchen table, still in his school clothes, staring at a glass of milk I'd poured him an hour ago. His face was streaked with dried tears, and he looked smaller than 7 years old should look. "Is Daddy angry?" he asked without looking up. "Daddy's always angry about something," I said, sitting down across from him. "That's not your fault, and it's not your problem anymore." "But Mommy said I shouldn't make Daddy angry. She said if I'm good, he won't hurt her." The words hit me like a physical blow. My daughter had been teaching my grandson to manage an abuser's moods, teaching him that his mother's safety depended on his behavior, making him responsible for violence he couldn't prevent and shouldn't have to witness. "Noah," I said carefully, "Mommy being hurt is never your fault, not ever. Adults are supposed to take care of children, not the other way around." He looked up at me then, and I saw Martha's eyes looking back. Sarah's eyes. Eyes that should have been bright with childhood mischief, not dark with adult fears. "Can I stay here tonight, Grandpa?" "You can stay here as long as you need to." But even as I said it, I knew I was making promises I didn't know how to keep. Tomorrow would bring consequences I wasn't prepared for. Legal challenges, family pressure. The full weight of Aiden's anger turned toward destruction rather than control. I was 67 years old, a widower who'd spent 3 years learning to live alone. I'd never been in a custody battle, never dealt with domestic violence, never had to fight for my family's safety. But looking at Noah's frightened face, I knew I was about to learn. The grandfather who'd been too polite to interfere was gone. Tomorrow, I'd have to become someone else entirely. The phone rang at 6:30 in the morning. Sarah's number flashed on the screen, and my heart lurched. I'd been awake since 4, sitting in my chair by the window, watching for headlights that might belong to police cars or angry fathers. Noah was still asleep upstairs in Sarah's old room, finally peaceful after the nightmares that had woken him twice during the night. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was small, defeated. Nothing like the confident woman who'd called me 3 months ago to cancel Thanksgiving dinner because Aiden had planned a surprise getaway. "I'm here, sweetheart." "Is Noah okay?" Aiden said. "He said you took him." The careful phrasing told me everything. Not, "You picked him up from school," or "You're keeping him safe." Took him. Like I was the criminal in this situation. "Noah's fine. He's sleeping." I kept my voice gentle, but underneath rage was building. "Sarah, we need to talk." "I can't. He's really upset. He thinks you're trying to turn Noah against him." "I'm not trying to turn anyone against anyone." But Noah was terrified yesterday. He was crying behind the school gym, afraid to come home. Silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her struggling with words she couldn't say safely. "Dad, I need you to bring him back, please. This is making everything worse." Making everything worse. As if the problem was my interference, not the violence that had made interference necessary. I closed my eyes and remembered the last conversation I'd had with my wife before the cancer took her voice away. "Promise me you'll watch out for her," Martha had whispered. "Something's not right with that man. Promise me you won't let him isolate her." I'd promised. And then I'd spent 3 years doing exactly the opposite. Stepping back when I should have stepped forward, respecting boundaries that were actually prison walls. "Sarah, do you remember when you were 8 years old and Tommy Miller pushed you off your bike?" "Dad, this isn't the time for..." "Do you remember what I told you? I said nobody has the right to hurt you. Not ever, not for any reason. I said if someone hurts you, you tell me and I'll make sure it stops." That was different. We were kids. No, it wasn't different. You're still my daughter. You're still the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she was scared. And you're still entitled to feel safe in your own home. Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "You don't understand how complicated this is. Then help me understand. Come over here. Bring whatever you need to bring. Talk to me without him listening. I can't just leave. It will make things worse." The fear in her voice transported me back 2 years, to the day everything started going wrong. Martha had been in hospice for a week. Sarah was staying at our house, taking turns with me sitting by Martha's bedside. Aiden had been supportive, bringing flowers, offering to handle arrangements, being the perfect son-in-law during a family crisis. I'd been grateful for his help, grateful that Sarah had someone to lean on when I was drowning in my own grief. I'd missed the signs that his support came with strings attached. The first string was the suggestion that Sarah needed space to process her grief, that maybe staying at our house with all of Martha's things around was keeping her from healing, that maybe she should come home with him, let me have time alone to figure out my next steps. The second string was the gradual redefinition of appropriate contact. Daily phone calls became every few days, then weekly. Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. Holiday plans started getting made without consulting me, then changed without explanation. The third string was the subtle campaign to reframe my natural grief as something unhealthy. Aiden would mention casually that Sarah was worried about me, that I seemed to be having trouble moving forward, that maybe I was becoming too dependent on their visits, too needy for their attention. I'd believed him. God help me. I'd believed him because it was easier than fighting, because I was drowning in my own loss and didn't have energy for family conflicts, because he was so reasonable, so concerned, so clearly devoted to taking care of Sarah during a difficult time. Dad? Sarah's voice pulled me back to the present. Are you still there? I'm here. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. When was the last time you felt free to make your own decision about anything? What do you mean? I mean, when was the last time you decided to visit me without checking with Aiden first? When was the last time you went somewhere without telling him exactly where you'd be and when you'd be back? When was the last time you had money in your purse that he didn't know about? The silence that followed was answer enough. He takes care of me, she said finally. He makes sure I don't have to worry about things. Or he makes sure you can't do anything without his permission. Dad, you're making it sound worse than it is. Every marriage has compromises. Compromises. The word Martha had used when she was trying to explain why she thought Aiden was dangerous. Watch how he handles compromise, she'd said. Watch what happens when Sarah wants something he doesn't want her to have. I'd watched. I'd seen Sarah give up her book club because Aiden thought it was just gossip. I'd seen her stop mentioning friends from work because Aiden didn't think they were good influences. I'd seen her become smaller, quieter, more careful about everything she said and did. And I'd told myself it was normal. Young couples figuring things out. None of my business how they ran their marriage. Sarah, I want you to think back to right after Mom died. Do you remember how Aiden helped me understand that you needed space to grieve? Yes, he was trying to help both of us. Do you remember that I wanted you to stay here longer, that I thought we should go through Mum's things together? You were hurting. You weren't thinking clearly. His words coming out of her mouth, the realization hit me like cold water. How many of Sarah's thoughts were actually Aiden's thoughts? How many of her decisions were actually his decisions? How many of her memories had been reshaped by his interpretation of events? Sweetheart, I need to tell you something about that time, about what your mother said before she died. Dad, please don't. She was worried about Aiden. She thought he was isolating you. She made me promise to watch out for you, and I failed. I let him convince me that watching out for you meant leaving you alone. Mom was sick. She was paranoid toward the end. The medication made her tired. It didn't make her stupid, and it didn't make her wrong about Aiden. I could hear her crying now, soft sounds she was trying to muffle. I have to go, she whispered. He's coming back, and if he finds me on the phone with you. Sarah, listen to me. You and Noah are always welcome here. Always. No matter what he's told you, no matter what you think you've done wrong, no matter how complicated things are, this is your home. It will always be your home. I know that, but I can't. I have to go. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, staring out the window at the street where my daughter lived 3 miles away. Close enough to see in 5 minutes, far enough that she might as well have been on another planet. Upstairs, I could hear Noah stirring. Soon he'd be awake, asking questions I didn't have answers for, asking when he could go home to a home that wasn't safe, asking why his parents were angry, asking what was going to happen next. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew what wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to step back this time. I wasn't going to respect boundaries that were actually walls. I wasn't going to let Aiden's reasonable explanations explain away my grandson's terror or my daughter's fear. Martha had been right. She'd seen what I'd been too grief-stricken to see. Now it was time to honor the promise I'd made to her, even if it meant learning to fight battles I'd never fought before. By noon, Sarah was standing on my front porch, but she wasn't alone. Aiden stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder in what anyone else might have mistaken for supportive touch. I knew better now. I could see the way her body tensed under his grip, the way she kept glancing back at him before speaking. "Dad, we need to talk." Her voice was steady, rehearsed. "About what's best for Noah." I stepped aside to let them in, noting how Aiden surveyed my living room, like he was cataloguing evidence. His eyes lingered on Noah's backpack by the couch, the empty cereal bowl on the coffee table, the superhero cartoon still playing softly on the television. "Where is he?" Aiden's voice was controlled now, the rage from last night replaced by something colder, more calculated. "Upstairs, playing in Sarah's old room." I kept my voice neutral, but my body was coiled tight. Something about this felt wrong, orchestrated. "Dad," Sarah said, settling onto the edge of the couch like she was ready to bolt. "Noah told us some things this morning, about what he said to you yesterday." "What kind of things?" Aiden moved to stand behind Sarah's chair, his presence looming. "He said he made up stories, said he was angry about not getting a toy he wanted, so he told you things that weren't true." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly crafted, that for a moment I wondered if I'd misunderstood. But then I remembered the terror in Noah's voice, the way he'd shaken when he tried to tell me what his father had threatened. "Is that what Noah told you? That he made it up?" "Kids his age have trouble distinguishing between fantasy and reality," Aiden said, his tone taking on the patronizing quality I'd learned to hate, especially when they're upset about discipline or consequences. "What kind of consequences?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, you know how Noah can be. He's been acting out lately, testing boundaries. Aiden's just trying to establish structure." Structure. Another word that sounded reasonable until you understood what it actually meant. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw things I'd been missing. The careful way she chose her words, the way she checked Aiden's expression before continuing, the way she sat with her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still, like movement might trigger something unpleasant. "Sarah, can I talk to you alone for a minute?" "Anything you need to say to Sarah, you can say in front of me," Aiden interjected smoothly. "We don't keep secrets from each other." "I'm not asking for secrets. I'm asking for 5 minutes with my daughter." "Dad, it's okay." Sarah's voice carried a note of warning that I was starting to recognize. "Aiden's right. We're a family. We should handle this together." But her eyes were saying something different. Her eyes were pleading with me to drop it, to let it go, to not make things worse than they already were. That's when I understood the true genius of Aiden's strategy. He hadn't just isolated Sarah from me. He'd trained her to isolate herself. He'd made her complicit in her own imprisonment by convincing her that resistance would only bring more pain, not just to her, but to Noah. "All right then," I said, sitting down across from them. "Let's handle this as a family. Tell me about these boundaries Noah's been testing." Aiden's smile was predatory. "Well, he's been having trouble following simple instructions, going to bed when he's told, eating what's put in front of him, showing proper respect to adults." Respect. I let the word hang in the air. What does respect look like in your house, Aiden? Children should be seen and not heard. They should do what they're told without argument. They should understand that questioning adult authority has consequences. What kind of consequences? Time-outs, loss of privileges, natural consequences for poor choices. The language was textbook perfect. Any family counselor would nod approvingly at such reasonable discipline strategies, but I was beginning to understand that with Aiden, the devil was always in the details he didn't share. And what happens when Noah questions your authority? Something flickered in Aiden's eyes. Trey learns that some questions are inappropriate. Inappropriate how? "Dad," Sarah interrupted, her voice tight with tension. "Noah needs consistency. He needs to know that what Aiden says goes. If he thinks he can run to you every time he doesn't like a consequence, he'll what, Sarah? He'll feel like he has somewhere safe to go. He'll never learn to respect authority. He'll grow up thinking he can manipulate adults by playing victim." The words hit me like a slap. My 7-year-old grandson, terrified and crying, was being framed as a manipulator. His attempt to seek help was being redefined as defiance that needed to be corrected. "Sarah, do you hear yourself? You're talking about a little boy who was afraid to come home from school." "He wasn't afraid," Aiden said firmly. "He was angry. There's a difference." "Is there? What exactly happened that made him angry?" Aiden and Sarah exchanged a look that lasted too long. When Sarah finally spoke, her words came out stilted, like she was reciting from a script. Noah had been told repeatedly not to interrupt adult conversations. Yesterday, he kept trying to get Sarah's attention while she was on an important phone call. When I corrected his behavior, he became defiant. How did you correct his behavior? I explained that interrupting is disrespectful and that there would be consequences if it continued. What kind of consequences? Another pause. Another exchanged look. He was sent to his room to think about his choices, Sarah said quickly. But something in her tone told me there was more to the story. Something in the way Aiden's jaw tightened told me that the official version I was hearing was carefully edited. And that's when he got angry enough to make up stories about you hurting his mother? Children his age often externalize their feelings, Aiden said, slipping into what sounded like rehearsed psychology. When they're frustrated with consequences, they create elaborate fantasies to justify their emotions. Elaborate fantasies. I stood up, needing distance from the poisonous reasonableness filling my living room. Is that what we're calling it when a child tries to report abuse? Dad, stop. Sarah's voice cracked. There's no abuse. Noah is fine. I'm fine. You're seeing problems that don't exist. Am I? Then why are you afraid to be alone with me for 5 minutes? Why do you check his face before you speak? Why does your 7-year-old son know what happens to mommy when daddy gets angry? Because you're putting ideas in his head. Aiden's composure finally slipped, revealing the anger underneath. You're teaching him that normal family discipline is abuse. You're confusing him. I'm confusing him? Or am I the first person who's actually listened to what he's trying to say? What he's trying to say is that he doesn't like consequences. What you're hearing is what you want to hear because you can't accept that Sarah has moved on with her life. The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to be effective. I had struggled with Sarah's marriage from the beginning. I had felt displaced, unnecessary, forgotten. But my personal feelings didn't explain the fear I'd seen in Noah's eyes or the careful way Sarah moved around her husband. Sarah, I said, ignoring Aiden completely. Look at me. Just you. Forget everything else for a minute and look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly, and I saw my little girl looking back. Not the controlled, careful woman she'd become, but the daughter who used to tell me everything, who trusted me to fix whatever was broken in her world. Are you happy? The question hung in the air like smoke. I watched emotions flicker across her face. Fear, longing, desperation, hope. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely. She started, then stopped, looked at Aiden, looked back at me. Happiness isn't the point, Dad. Marriage is about commitment, about working through difficulties. What difficulties are you working through? Normal married couple stuff, communication issues, different parenting styles. Different parenting styles. I kept my voice gentle, but I felt like I was trying to defuse a bomb. What's your parenting style, Sarah? I believe children need structure and love in equal measure. And Aiden's style? Children need to learn that actions have consequences, that the world doesn't revolve around their feelings. And when your styles conflict? When you think Noah needs comfort and Aiden thinks he needs consequences? The silence stretched so long, I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Marriage is about compromise. But her eyes told a different story. Her eyes said that in her marriage, compromise meant surrender. Always and only surrender. Sarah, I want you to come stay here for a few days. You and Noah. Just until we can figure out what's really going on. That's not happening, Aiden said flatly. I wasn't talking to you. You don't get to make decisions about my family. Sarah is my family. Noah is my family. And right now, my family seems to be in trouble. Your family is fine. What's in trouble is your ability to accept that Sarah doesn't need you anymore. The cruelty was surgical, designed to make me back down, to make me question my own motives, but I'd already questioned them. I'd already faced the possibility that my concern was really just selfish need, dressed up as protection. And I'd decided it didn't matter. Even if my motives were mixed, even if I was partly wrong about the situation, Noah had been terrified. That was real. That mattered more than my pride or Aiden's anger or even Sarah's resistance. Sarah, I said one more time, my door is always open. Always. No matter what anyone tells you about me, no matter how complicated things get, no matter how much trouble you think you'll cause, this is your home. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Couldn't speak, maybe. with Aiden watching every micro-expression on her face. They left 10 minutes later, taking Noah with them despite my protests. I watched from my window as Aiden strapped my grandson into his car seat, noting how gentle he was, how patient, how perfectly he played the role of devoted father. But I also noted how Noah didn't look back at my house, how he sat perfectly still during the entire process, how he'd said goodbye to me with the mechanical politeness of a child who'd been coached on appropriate behavior. As their car disappeared around the corner, I realized that the battle for my family's safety was going to be harder than I'd imagined, because the enemy wasn't just Aiden's violence, it was Sarah's trained compliance, Noah's learned helplessness, and a system so perfectly calibrated that resistance looked like dysfunction. But I also realized something else. I wasn't the same man who'd stepped back 3 years ago to give them space. Grief had aged me, but it had also taught me what mattered. And what mattered was fighting for the people you loved, even when they couldn't fight for themselves. Especially then. 3 days passed without word from Sarah or Noah. 3 days of phone calls that went straight to voicemail, text messages that showed as delivered but never answered. On Thursday morning, I drove past their house twice, looking for signs of life, but the curtains stayed drawn and no one answered when I knocked. By Friday, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I called Sarah's workplace, expecting to be told she was in meetings or too busy to talk. Instead, the receptionist told me Sarah hadn't been in all week. Emergency family situation, according to her supervisor. No timeline for return. That's when real fear set in. Not the abstract worry I'd been carrying, but cold, practical terror. If Sarah wasn't at work and wasn't answering her phone, where was she? What was Aiden doing to ensure her continued cooperation? I spent Friday night creating a plan that felt both necessary and insane. Saturday morning, I drove to their house at 7 a.m., when Aiden would typically be out for his weekend run. If Sarah was there alone, if Noah was safe, maybe I could reach them without triggering another confrontation. But when I pulled into their driveway, I could see through the front window that the living room was empty, furniture covered with sheets, like they were preparing for an extended absence. They left yesterday morning. I turned to find Mrs. Patterson, their next-door neighbor, watching me from her garden. She was in her 70s, the kind of woman who knew everything that happened on her block and wasn't shy about sharing her observations. Left for where? Didn't say. But they packed like they weren't coming back soon. 2 suitcases, boxes of Noah's things. The little boy looked upset about something. My heart dropped into my stomach. Upset how? Crying, asking his mother if they were coming back. She kept telling him it was just a vacation, but Mrs. Patterson shook her head. Didn't look like any vacation packing I've ever seen. Did you see which direction they went? East on Maple Street. But Mr. Collins, can I ask you something? Is everything all right with your daughter? She's been looking poorly lately, thin, nervous. And that husband of hers. What about him? Mrs. Patterson glanced around like she was checking for surveillance, then stepped closer to the fence between our properties. I hear things sometimes through the walls, voices raised, things breaking. Last week, I heard Noah crying for nearly an hour straight. When I went to check, saw your daughter in the backyard with a black eye she'd tried to cover with makeup. Did you call anyone? Report it? Report what? I didn't see him hit her. Could have been an accident, right? Could have been a dozen things. And she's always so polite when I ask, always has a reasonable explanation. Reasonable explanations. Aiden's specialty. Mrs. Patterson, if you see them come back, would you call me? I handed her my card. I'm worried about my grandson. I will. And Mr. Collins, I hope you find them. That little boy, he deserves better than what he's been getting. I drove home in a daze, trying to process the implications. Aiden had moved them. Probably the moment they left my house on Tuesday, he'd started planning an exit strategy. By now, they could be anywhere. Another state, another city, somewhere I'd never think to look. The phone was ringing when I walked through my front door. Unknown number, but something made me answer anyway. Grandpa. Noah's voice was small, whispered like he was trying not to be overheard. Noah, where are you, buddy? I don't know. Daddy said we're visiting friends, but I don't see any friends. Mommy's been crying, and Daddy says if I don't stop asking questions, we'll have to move somewhere even farther away. Noah, listen to me very carefully. Can you see anything outside? Street signs, store names, anything that might tell me where you are? I can see a big sign that says Motel 6. And there's a McDonald's across the street. That's good, that helps. Noah, are you safe right now? Is Daddy there? He went to get food. Mommy's in the bathroom. She told me to be quiet while she... The line went quiet, except for muffled sounds in the background. Then Sarah's voice, sharp with panic. Noah, who are you talking to? Give me that phone right now. Mommy, it's Grandpa. I just wanted to... Give me the phone, Noah, right now. There was a sound of struggle. Then Sarah's voice came on the line, tight with fear and desperation. Dad, you have to stop. You have to stop looking for us. Stop calling. Stop making this worse. Sarah, where are you? What's happening? We're safe. We're together. That's all that matters. You're in a motel room. That's not safe. That's hiding. From what? From me. From complications. From situations that spiral out of control. From... Her voice broke. Dad, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep defending choices I don't understand myself. For the first time in years, my daughter sounded like herself. Not the careful, controlled woman she'd become, but the girl who used to call me when she was scared or confused or needed someone to help her figure out right from wrong. Then stop defending them. Come home. I can't. You don't understand what he's capable of when he feels cornered. What he's already done to make sure I understand the consequences of betrayal. What has he done, Sarah? Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Sarah? He showed me pictures. Her voice was barely audible. Pictures of women who left their husbands. Women who tried to take their children away. Women who thought they could outsmart men who were smarter than them. Cold realization washed over me. What kind of pictures? Newspaper articles, obituaries, police reports. He has a whole folder, Dad. Stories about women who died in car accidents after filing for divorce. Women who committed suicide after losing custody battles. Women who simply disappeared after restraining orders were filed. Sarah, those are threats. That's terrorism. He never said they were threats. He just said he thought I should understand how dangerous it can be when families get torn apart by outside interference. Outside interference, meaning me. Meaning anyone who doesn't understand that some marriages are worth preserving regardless of difficulties. What difficulties, Sarah? Say it out loud. Tell me what you're preserving. Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was flat, emotionless. He hits me sometimes, when I question his decisions or fail to support him appropriately. He says it's correction, not abuse, because abuse implies intent to harm, and his intent is to educate. The clinical language was chilling. She was repeating his justifications, his twisted logic, like she'd been programmed. And Noah is learning to be respectful, to follow instructions without argument, to understand that family loyalty means protecting family members from outside judgment, by keeping family secrets, by being discreet about private family matters. Sarah, listen to yourself. You're describing a prison. I'm describing a marriage, a complicated marriage, but a marriage nonetheless. And marriages require sacrifice. They require sacrifice from both people, not just one. Dad, I have to go. He'll be back soon. And if he finds out I called you, what will happen if he finds out? Nothing violent, nothing dramatic. He'll just be disappointed in my ability to make good decisions independently. And when Aiden is disappointed, the consequences are always educational. What does that mean? But the line was already dead. I sat in my empty kitchen, holding the phone, trying to process what I'd just heard. My daughter wasn't just being abused. She was being systematically broken down. Her language replaced with his language. Her reality replaced with his version of events. And Noah was being raised to accept all of it as normal, to see his mother's bruises as educational consequences, to understand that questioning authority was dangerous, to learn that love looked like control and respect looked like fear. The phone rang again almost immediately. This time when I answered, Aiden's voice was cold with fury. You just cost your daughter a week of peace, old man. Every time you interfere, every time you make her question her commitments, she pays the price for your selfishness. Where are you, Aiden? What are you doing to them? I'm protecting my family from toxic influences. I'm teaching my wife about the consequences of disloyalty. And I'm making sure my son understands that grandfathers who don't respect boundaries don't get to be part of his life. You can't keep them forever. People will start asking questions. Sarah's job, Noah's school, neighbors who notice they're gone. Sarah quit her job yesterday, sent a very professional email about pursuing new opportunities out of state. Noah's school received a withdrawal notice citing family relocation for my career advancement. And neighbors already know we're a close private family who don't appreciate outside interference in our personal matters. The planning was meticulous, terrifying in its thoroughness. Aiden had been preparing for this possibility, maybe for months, creating a plausible narrative for their disappearance that painted him as a dedicated family man, protecting his loved ones from disruptive influences. What do you want, Aiden? I want you to disappear from our lives completely. No calls, no visits, no attempts to contact Sarah or Noah, no police reports or missing person claims, or any other desperate measures. You forget you have a daughter and grandson, and they get to live in peace. And if I don't, then they pay the educational consequences of your choices. Sarah learns about disloyalty through increasingly intensive correction. Noah learns about the dangers of outside manipulation through increasingly restrictive safety measures. And you learn about the price of interference through increasingly permanent separation. The threats were veiled but unmistakable. Step back or watch them suffer for my attempts to help. You're insane if you think I'm going to abandon them. I'm logical. You're emotional. That's why I'll win and you'll lose, because logic always beats emotion in the long run. Not always, Aiden. Sometimes love beats logic. Sometimes stubbornness beats planning. Sometimes old men who have nothing left to lose beat young men who think they're smarter than everyone else. For the first time I heard uncertainty in his voice. You're making a mistake, old man. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. I hung up and immediately called the police. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Detective Morrison, a woman in her 40s who'd clearly handled domestic violence cases before. She listened to my story with professional sympathy, took notes on everything I could remember, and then delivered the news I'd been dreading. Mr. Collins, I understand your concern, but without evidence of immediate danger or a crime in progress, our options are limited. Adults have the right to move wherever they want, even if family members disagree with their decisions. What about the threats? The pictures he showed Sarah? If she's willing to file a complaint, we can investigate. But based on what you've told me, it sounds like she's not ready to do that. Because she's terrified. Maybe. Or maybe she's genuinely choosing to stay with her husband despite difficulties you disagree with. I see it more often than you'd think. And Noah, what about his rights? If there's evidence of child abuse, we can act immediately. But a 7-year-old being upset about moving isn't sufficient grounds for emergency intervention. I left the police station feeling defeated but not hopeless. Detective Morrison had given me her card, told me to call immediately if I heard from them again, promised to file my report in case they surfaced elsewhere, and other departments needed background information. But she'd also told me something else, something that felt like a lifeline. Mr. Collins, abusers like your son-in-law usually can't resist the urge to prove they're in control. He'll contact you again, probably soon, to make sure you understand his power over the situation. When he does, be ready. Record everything. Document everything. Make him think he's winning while you build a case he can't anticipate. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by photos of Sarah and Noah, planning my next move. Aiden thought he'd won by removing them from my reach, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what a grandfather would do to save his family. And he was about to learn that some lessons are more painful than others. Detective Morrison was right. Aiden couldn't resist proving his control. 10 days after they disappeared, he called me at 2 in the morning, his voice thick with alcohol and satisfaction. Missing them yet, old man? I fumbled for the recording app on my phone, grateful that Detective Morrison had walked me through the setup. Where are they, Aiden? Close enough to watch you. Far enough that you'll never find them without my permission. His laugh was ugly, self-satisfied. You should see Sarah now, really learning about consequences, really understanding what happens when wives choose their fathers over their husbands. What are you doing to her? Teaching, always teaching. Did you know that bruises heal faster when they're in places nobody can see? Sarah's getting a real education in anatomy these days. My hand tightened on the phone, rage building like pressure in my chest. But I forced myself to stay calm, to let him talk, to give him enough rope to hang himself with his own words. And Noah? Noah's learning too. Learning what happens to little boys who tell lies about their fathers. Learning that some stories should never be shared outside the family. He's gotten very quiet lately. Very obedient. You're terrorizing a 7-year-old child. I'm raising a son who understands respect. Something your generation never learned to teach properly. Where are you staying? Wouldn't you like to know? Actually, why don't I tell you? We're at the Pine Ridge Motel on Highway 12, room 207. Sarah keeps asking if she can call you, begging really. Maybe you should come visit. See for yourself how much your interference has improved their lives." The address felt like a trap, but it was also an opportunity. Either way, I wasn't going to ignore it. "I'll be there." "I'm counting on it." "Oh, and Collins, come alone. Police involvement would be educational for everyone involved." The line went dead. I sat there for 30 seconds, then called Detective Morrison. "It's a trap," she said immediately after I played her the recording. "He wants you there for a reason, and that reason isn't a family reunion." "I know, but I can't ignore it either. That's my daughter and grandson." "Then we do this smart. You go, but not alone. We'll have units positioned nearby and you'll wear a wire. The moment things go bad, we move in. What if he sees the backup? What if he runs? Then we track him down using the evidence you're going to help us gather. Mr. Collins, this is our chance to get your family back, but only if we play it right." 2 hours later, I was driving toward the Pine Ridge Motel with Detective Morrison's voice in my earpiece and a recording device taped to my chest. The plan was simple: get Aiden talking, gather evidence of his threats and abuse, and signal for backup the moment Sarah and Noah were in immediate danger. But as I pulled into the motel parking lot, I realized that no plan survives contact with reality. Room 207 was on the second floor, accessible by external stairs that would make any police approach visible from 100 yards away. Aiden had chosen his ground carefully, ensuring he'd see anyone coming long before they could reach him. I climbed the stairs slowly, noting the torn curtain in the window, the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging askew on the door handle. When I knocked, Aiden's voice came through the thin door immediately, like he'd been waiting right behind it. "Come in, old man. Door's unlocked." I pushed the door open and stepped into a nightmare. The room was small, cramped, filled with the smell of fear and confinement. Sarah sat on the far bed, her face turned away from me, but I could see the bruising on her neck, the careful way she held her left arm. Noah was curled up next to her, so small he looked like he was trying to disappear into the mattress. Aiden stood by the window, backlit by the parking lot lights, looking every inch the man in control of his territory. "Look who came to visit," he said, his voice carrying a false cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. "Sarah, aren't you going to say hello to your father?" Sarah raised her head slowly, and I had to fight not to gasp. Her left eye was swollen shut, her lip split, her face carrying the mottled purple evidence of systematic violence. "Hi, Dad." Her voice was hollow, mechanical. "I told you not to come. I had to make sure you were safe." "Safe?" Aiden laughed. "Look around, Collins. Does this look safe to you? This is what happens when grandfathers don't mind their own business. This is what interference costs. This is what cowardice looks like," I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside me. "Hiding in a motel room, beating women, terrorizing children. Real brave, Aiden. Brave enough to do what's necessary to protect my family from toxic influences. Sarah, tell your father how much better things have been since he stopped interfering." Sarah looked at me with desperate eyes, and I could see her struggling with words she couldn't say safely. "Things have been educational," she said finally, using his language because it was the only language left to her. "Educational," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it when you beat your wife unconscious?" "I never said I beat anyone unconscious. Sarah had an accident. Fell down some stairs while she was learning about the consequences of dishonesty." "What dishonesty?" "Calling you behind my back, crying to Daddy about imaginary problems, making family difficulties sound worse than they actually are." I looked at Noah, who was watching this exchange with the hollow-eyed expression of a child who'd seen too much, learned too early that the adults who were supposed to protect him were the source of danger. "Noah, are you okay, buddy?" Before he could answer, Aiden moved swiftly across the room and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Not roughly, but with unmistakable ownership. "Noah's fine, aren't you, son? Tell Grandpa how much you've learned about telling the truth." Noah looked up at his father with pure terror, then back at me. "I learned that some stories aren't for sharing," he whispered. "I learned that family business stays in the family." "What else did you learn?" "That grandfathers who cause trouble make bad things happen to mommies." The words hit me like physical blows. Aiden had made Noah complicit in his mother's abuse, convinced him that my attempts to help were the cause of her suffering. "Very good," Aiden said, ruffling Noah's hair with fake affection. "See how smart he is? How quickly he learns? Kids adapt to reality much faster than adults do." "Reality," I said. "Is that what we're calling this insanity?" "This is what reality looks like when people refuse to accept reasonable boundaries. When they force situations to escalate beyond comfortable management. Comfortable management? You mean when they refuse to let you abuse your family in peace? I mean when they refuse to let families handle their own problems internally, when they insist on turning private matters into public spectacles. Aiden moved closer to me, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the manic gleam in his eyes that suggested he was running on very little sleep and a lot of paranoid energy. But you know what, Collins? I'm glad you came, really glad, because now we can settle this permanently. How do you figure? Because now you get to choose. Walk away permanently, forget you ever had a daughter and grandson, and they get to heal from the damage your interference has caused. Or keep pushing, keep interfering, keep trying to destroy my family, and watch what happens when I stop being patient about educational consequences. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo that made my blood run cold. It was Sarah, unconscious, her face so swollen I barely recognized her. This was Tuesday night after she tried to call you again. Wednesday night looked worse. Thursday night, well, let's just say she stopped trying to make unauthorized phone calls. You sick piece of garbage. I'm a husband who takes his responsibilities seriously. Sarah made vows. She promised to love, honor, and obey. She promised to put our marriage before all other relationships. She's just learning what those promises actually mean. Those vows don't include giving you the right to beat her unconscious. They include giving me the right to correct behavior that threatens our marriage, to use whatever measures are necessary to protect our family unit from destructive outside influences. I looked at Sarah, willing her to meet my eyes, to give me some sign that she wanted help, that she was ready to fight back, but her gaze stayed fixed on the floor, her body language screaming defeat. Sarah, I said softly, look at me. Don't, Aiden warned. Don't make this harder for her than it already is. Sarah, remember what I taught you when you were little, about people who hurt you? Dad, please, she whispered. Just go. Just leave us alone. It's better when you're not involved. Better for who? Better for everyone, better for Noah, better for... She gestured helplessly at her bruised face. Better for managing the situation. The situation where your husband beats you for talking to your father. The situation where my choices affect everyone I love. Where my decisions have consequences for people who can't protect themselves. She looked meaningfully at Noah, and I understood. She wasn't just staying to protect herself. She was staying because Aiden had made it clear that resistance would mean worse consequences for her son. Very wise, Aiden said approvingly. Sarah's learning that sometimes love means sacrifice. Sometimes protecting your family means accepting difficulties. Accepting abuse, you mean. Accepting reality. The reality that some men don't tolerate disrespect. The reality that some marriages require more intensive management than others. The reality that some grandfathers need to learn when to mind their own business. He moved closer to Sarah and Noah, positioning himself between them and me in a way that made his ownership unmistakable. So what's it going to be, Collins? Peace through permanent separation, or escalation through continued interference? I looked at my daughter, broken and terrified. At my grandson, learning that love looked like fear, and family meant keeping dangerous secrets. At the man who'd systematically destroyed everything I cared about, while convinced he was protecting it. And I made a decision that would change everything. There's a third option, Aiden. What's that? I smiled, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. The option where you learn that some grandfathers are more dangerous than you think. I reached into my jacket pocket, noting how Aiden tensed, probably expecting a weapon. Instead, I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. A recording app, running for the last 20 minutes. Every threat, every admission, every description of violence, all of it captured and automatically uploading to Detective Morrison's secure server. You've been talking to more than just me tonight, Aiden, and some conversations have consequences you didn't plan for. The color drained from his face as he realized what had happened. In his arrogance, his need to prove his control, he'd handed me everything I needed to destroy him. You lying piece of... The door exploded inward as Detective Morrison and 3 officers burst into the room, weapons drawn, moving with the precision of professionals who'd done this before. Everyone on the ground, now. Aiden spun toward the window, like he was thinking of running, but there was nowhere to go. No escape route he hadn't considered, because he'd been too focused on demonstrating his power to worry about practical consequences. Aiden Maxwell, you're under arrest for domestic violence, child endangerment, and terroristic threatening. As they cuffed him, he looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, old man. You have no idea what you've unleashed. Actually, I said, watching them lead him toward the door, I know exactly what I've unleashed. Justice. Something you should have considered before you decided to hurt my family. But even as I said it, I knew the hardest part was just beginning. Aiden was gone, but the damage he'd done would take much longer to heal. And Sarah and Noah were looking at me like they weren't sure if they'd been rescued or if their world had just collapsed entirely. 6 months later, I was teaching Noah how to change a tire in my driveway when Sarah came home from her new job at the county social services office. She moved differently now, not the careful, controlled movements of someone anticipating violence, but not yet the free, natural grace she'd had as a child. Healing, I'd learned, was a process measured in increments. "How was your day?" I asked, watching her face for the micro-expressions that still sometimes revealed the anxiety she worked hard to hide. Good. Really good, actually. Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that still surprised me sometimes. I helped a woman today who reminded me of me 6 months ago, scared, convinced she had no options, certain that leaving would make things worse for her children. She sat down on the porch steps, watching Noah struggle with the lug wrench, letting him figure it out himself instead of jumping in to help. That was progress too. For the first 2 months after the arrest, she'd hovered over him constantly, unable to let him out of her sight, terrified that somehow Aiden would find a way to reach them even from jail. What did you tell her? The truth, that leaving is terrifying and complicated, and sometimes things get worse before they get better. But that staying in a situation where your children learn that love looks like fear is worse than any temporary chaos. Noah got the tire iron positioned correctly and managed to loosen the first lug nut. His whoop of triumph was the kind of pure joy that had been absent from his life for too long. "I did it, Grandpa. I did it myself." "You sure did, buddy. Your mom's going to need someone who knows how to fix things." Sarah's laugh was rueful. "I'm learning to fix things myself, actually. Started a car maintenance class last week. Figured it was time I knew how to take care of practical things instead of depending on other people to handle them for me." Independence had become Sarah's project, her way of rebuilding herself from the foundation up. She'd enrolled in evening classes, learned to manage her own finances, started making decisions without asking anyone's permission or approval. Sometimes she made mistakes, chose wrong, had to backtrack and try again. But they were her mistakes, her choices, her learning process. "Any word from the lawyer about the trial?" Her expression tightened slightly. Even 6 months later, thinking about having to face Aiden in court brought back some of the old fear. "Next month. Detective Morrison says they have enough evidence to proceed without my testimony if I'm not ready, but I want to testify. I want him to hear me tell the truth about what he did. Not his version, not his interpretation, not his educational consequences, just the truth." The truth had taken time to emerge. For weeks after the arrest, Sarah had minimized, rationalized, found ways to blame herself for Aiden's violence. The therapist she'd started seeing specialized in abuse recovery, helping victims untangle the web of manipulation and self-doubt that made escape so difficult. Noah had needed therapy too, though his recovery looked different. He'd had nightmares for months, waking up screaming about bad men coming to hurt Mommy. He'd regressed in some ways, becoming clingy and fearful about separation. But gradually, with patient consistency, he'd started to relax into being a child again. "Grandpa," he said now, looking up from the tire he was still working on, "when the trial happens, will the bad man come back?" It was a question he'd asked dozens of times in different ways, and each time I gave him the same honest answer. The bad man will be in the courtroom, but he won't be able to hurt anyone. There will be police officers there and judges, and lots of people whose job it is to make sure everyone stays safe. But after the trial, he'll go to jail for a very long time. And even after that, there will be rules that say he can't come near you or your mom ever again. Noah nodded solemnly, the way children do when they're processing information that's too complex for their age, but necessary for their peace of mind. "Will I have to talk to the judge?" "Only if you want to, and only about what you remember, not about anything that might scare you or make you feel bad." Sarah had made the decision early on that Noah's testimony wasn't necessary for conviction. The recording I'd made contained enough evidence to establish Aiden's guilt, and she refused to put her son through the trauma of facing his abuser in court. It was one of the first major decisions she'd made entirely on her own, without consulting me or her therapist or anyone else. Just a mother protecting her child in the way she thought best. "Mom," Noah said, abandoning the tire to run over to Sarah, "Grandpa says I'm getting really good at fixing things." "You are. You're getting good at lots of things." And he was. Noah had started Little League, something Aiden had never allowed because organized sports involved too much interaction with other families, too many opportunities for Noah to talk about life at home. He was taking swimming lessons at the community center, learning to ride a bike without training wheels, making friends at his new school. Most importantly, he was learning to be loud again, to ask questions, to express opinions, to disagree with adults without fear of consequences. It had taken months of patient encouragement, but gradually his personality had emerged from the careful silence Aiden had imposed. "Can we have pizza for dinner?" he asked now, the kind of simple request that had been impossible in Aiden's house, where meals were planned and executed according to rigid schedules and dietary rules. "What do you think, Mom?" I asked, making a point of deferring to Sarah's parental authority. That had been one of the hardest adjustments for all of us. After years of Aiden making every decision, Sarah had initially tried to transfer that responsibility to me. It had taken months of gentle insistence to help her reclaim her role as Noah's primary parent, to trust her own judgment about what was best for her son. "Pizza sounds perfect," she said, "but Noah gets to pick the toppings." "Pepperoni and extra cheese," Noah shouted immediately, then caught himself and lowered his voice. "Yo, please." The automatic correction was a reminder that some habits took longer to break than others. Aiden's voice lessons about appropriate volume, respectful requests, and proper behavior in adult company had been drilled deep. But we were working on it, all of us, helping Noah rediscover the normal boundaries of childhood rather than the restrictive rules of survival. As we cleaned up the tire-changing tools and headed inside for dinner, I caught Sarah looking around the house with the expression she wore sometimes when she was processing how much her life had changed. "You okay? Just thinking about how different this feels. Making decisions about dinner, about weekend plans, about Noah's activities, making them based on what we want instead of what will avoid consequences. Good different or scary different? Both, I think. Sometimes I catch myself waiting for someone to tell me I'm doing things wrong, making mistakes that will have to be corrected later. And then I remember that I'm allowed to make mistakes, that normal mistakes don't require educational consequences or intensive correction. They just require learning and adjusting and trying again. Over dinner, Noah told us about his day at school, about the book he was reading, about the friend who'd invited him to a birthday party next weekend. Normal 7-year-old chatter, but each casual story represented a freedom that had been unthinkable 6 months ago. "Can I go to Jeremy's party, Mom? What do you think? Do you want to go?" "Yeah, he's really nice, and his mum said they're going to have a bounce house." "Then yes, you can go. We'll get him a present this weekend." "What kind of present? What kind of present do you think Jeremy would like?" The conversation continued, easy and natural, with Sarah guiding Noah through the process of thinking about other people's preferences, considering options, making choices. It was ordinary parenting, the kind millions of families did every day without thinking about it. For us, it was revolutionary. Later that evening, after Noah was asleep, Sarah and I sat on the back porch drinking tea and talking about her plans for the future. She'd been accepted into a graduate program in social work, starting in the fall. Her experience with abuse had given her insights that could help other women, and she'd found purpose in the idea of turning her trauma into a tool for helping others. "I got a letter today," she said quietly, "from Aiden." My hand tightened on my teacup. "What kind of letter?" "The usual. How sorry he is, how much he's learned, how different things would be if I gave him another chance. How do you feel about that? 6 months ago, I probably would have believed him, would have started thinking that maybe I'd overreacted, maybe things hadn't been as bad as I remembered. And now? Now I know that change isn't something you promise. It's something you demonstrate over time. And I know that I don't owe him the opportunity to prove anything." She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the garden where Noah had helped me plant vegetables in the spring. Watching things grow had been therapeutic for all of us, a tangible reminder that with proper care and patience, damaged things could flourish again. "I used to think love meant tolerating whatever someone did to you," she said finally. "That if you really loved someone, you accepted their flaws, overlooked their mistakes, found ways to make things work regardless of how much they hurt you. And now? Now I think love means expecting people to treat you with respect. It means believing you deserve kindness and safety and the freedom to be yourself without fear. That's a hard lesson to learn. It's a harder lesson to teach. But I want Noah to grow up knowing that he deserves relationships that make him feel valued and secure. I want him to understand that people who love you don't hurt you, threaten you, or make you afraid of their reactions." Through the window, we could see Noah's nightlight glowing in his bedroom, and I thought about all the nights he'd gone to sleep afraid, listening for sounds that might mean danger was coming. Now he slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that the adults in his life were focused on his well-being rather than their own need for control. "You know what I realized the other day?" Sarah said. "What's that?" "I can't remember the last time I apologized for something that wasn't actually my fault. For months after we moved in here, I was constantly saying sorry for taking up space, for having needs, for making decisions Aiden might not have approved of. And now? Now I save my apologies for times when I actually make mistakes, and I've discovered that most of my decisions don't require anyone else's approval. It was a small thing, but it represented a fundamental shift in how she saw herself, not as someone who needed constant correction and guidance, but as a competent adult capable of managing her own life. As we headed inside, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not the dramatic moment when Aiden was arrested, not the legal proceedings that would hopefully result in his conviction, but these quiet evening conversations. Noah's laughter during dinner, Sarah's growing confidence in her own judgment, the slow, patient work of rebuilding trust and safety and hope. The grandfather who'd been too polite to interfere was gone. In his place was a man who understood that sometimes love requires fierce protection, that sometimes peace requires fighting, and that sometimes the most important battles are won not in dramatic confrontations, but in the daily choice to create something better from the wreckage of what came before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new steps in the healing process, new opportunities to prove that families could be sources of strength rather than fear. But tonight my daughter and grandson were safe, and that was enough. More than enough, it was everything.